Alright, when everyone talks about Sony's Vaio line, they're always on about the little fuckers. These tiny things, and they're cute and they're adorable with your TXs and your UXs, but what if you have a really tiny dong and you need everyone in the office to know about it? Enter the Sony Vaio PCG-DRT916Z. Yeah, some things really never change, huh? I physically cannot get across the scale of this thing on camera. It is fucking massive. It dwarfs every single other laptop I own. Seriously, it's like a Vaio sandwich. It's not just compensating in size either. This thing packs a 3.06 GHz Pentium 4 that can suck upwards of 70 watts under load, 2 gigs of DDR memory, and critically, a GeForce FX Go 5600. We'll talk about that one later. For now, that GPU powers a 16.1-inch LCD at 1400 by 1050, which is agonizingly close to a full 4x3 1080p, and not even the highest they went. Some models supposedly hit 1600 by 1200, a completely ludicrous resolution in 2003. And what a display too! It's glossy, which wasn't really the style of the time, but has all the same advantages and disadvantages of modern glossy LCDs. Super deep blacks, wonderful contrast, but you can see your ugly mug in the reflection all the time, especially outdoors. Not that you'd be outdoors for long. To complement that massive screen, hefty GPU and ludicrous CPU is a 55 watt-hour battery, which some basic math shows, yeah, it's useless. Reviews at the time said an hour and a half. I can't say I see it. To their credit, it is swappable, and if you're willing to lose your DVD drive, you could fit 2, and it's not like the extra weight matters when it's 4.5 kilos already. That's the same weight as a fat PS3. That's the same weight as a MacBook and an iBook. That's 1 Surface laptop, 2 Surface Pros, 1 Type cover, 1 Surface 2, 2 iPhones, and a Surface Pen. You're not carrying this thing around. So what the fuck are you doing with it then? This one is shipped with what? Alright, googling that X08 number indicates this was XP Home, but I have standards for myself at xpactivate.exe, so I went with Pro instead, and naturally this being a Vaio immediately ran into problems. Now you probably already know that Vaio recovery media is few and far between, but in this case that's because it never actually existed. See, these machines had integrated recovery partitions on their original hard drives, and since mine shipped from France without its original hard drive, yet another crime the French will eventually pay for, I had no hope unless someone else did the backup work for me. And yeah, no, not even some hyper-precision Googling got me anywhere. It probably existed at some point, but not here, so I had to work from scratch. Sony themselves helpfully nuked their driver pages and FTP years ago, but thanks to the generosity of one guy, there's a fully accessible mirror, but only for that FTP. To find the drivers for your specific model, you'd have to use a site like SonyVaioDriver.com, which is also now helpfully dead. Fortunately, after some digging, I ran across a very helpful driver package I've since been entirely unable to locate for this video. Thank you, whoever made this. It included the big ones like the GPU, Wi-Fi and chipset, but also the really annoying ones like the fucking Vaio-specific Alps touchpad driver and the shit to make all the buttons work. What this didn't include was any of the bundled shitware. And you might be thinking that's a good thing, and in general I'd agree with you. I'm firmly with CRD on the packing foam analogy, but in this specific case it means I don't really know firsthand what Sony intended you to do with this machine. The one single review of this laptop that exists on the internet indicates it originally came with Picture Gear Studio, Photoshop Elements, Premiere 6.0 LE, and WinDVD, a pretty common selection of software for the time. They also note that it shipped with Sonic Stage Studio but without a line import, which, yeah, that's pretty funny. So I went scouring and ended up installing the original Adobe Creative Suite to try and get a feel for how the stock software might have performed. Now I'm no Steve Jobs. I can't go next door and be like, "Ayo, Finding Nemo poster please for some sick demo," so bear with me. Photoshop generally ran fine. Exactly what I would have expected from this kind of Pentium 4. Little choppy on the brush tool, kinda slow resizing text, nothing out of the ordinary. Premiere though, total trash fire. Now, some of this was probably a skill issue. I don't exactly have a lot of contemporary footage lying around, and apparently Premiere can't read DV on its own, so I tried a few things. Firstly, I definitely overshot this thing's capabilities testing HD DV footage, which encodes at 1440 by 1080. It wanted none of it, and even without saving, that project never worked again. Learning from that failure, I went for standard definition DV, taking some general test footage and on my desktop converting it to DV, but in a QuickTime container. This, I mean, it technically went smoother, but it's really a 20 versus 200 grit kind of comparison. Sure, it's 10 times smoother, but I mean, just look at it, I'm still drawing with Task Manager. Things got much smoother after I did the Premiere Classic, rendered out the timeline, so I was able to make the very tiny edit I wanted to test with a simple start and end trim. And after finding an overheating power adapter and a frankly odd inability to encode AAC audio, it finished rendering out an MPEG-4 version in about 5.5 minutes. Not too bad, shame getting to this point took a very long time. This is a little odd to me, because from what I can gather, this is the kind of work Sony expected you to be doing on here. It's clearly too powerful and too impractical in terms of battery life to be used as a general office system. And look, it isn't going to use that GPU. So I know what you're here for. What about games? Well, remember how I said we'd get back to that GPU? Yeah, this seems kind of fascinating. See, these days Nvidia's mobile chips often barely have any relation to their desktop counterparts, and even back then this was still somewhat true, but the Go 5600 seems a little special. From what I can tell, it's pretty damn close to the desktop FX 5600, so it's only really hamstrung by the pitiful 64 meg frame buffer. Oh, and by being, an FX 5000 series card known for being kinda terrible. Yeah, the mobility Radeon 9600 kinda kicked this thing's ass in AnandTech's tests back then, though they mention Half-Life 2 barely surpassing 10 frames a second, and I mean, that doesn't seem right at all. Here at 1024x768 with medium details, the game runs pretty well and looks decent enough to my eye. I actually ended up playing the game for a decent amount of time like this, and there were some rough patches, but it generally hovered around 45 FPS, which is decent. Unreal Tournament 2004 also ran like a champ. I aim to test these games mainly at 10x7, but this ran so well I bumped it up to 1280x1024 and still had no performance problems. Many skill problems, no performance problems. I assume it'd get a little more heavy outside the early single player campaign, but I can't see it being much worse than this. On the other end of the spectrum, Roller Coaster Tycoon 3 ran okay. It heavily depended on the scenario. Ones with lots of water and reflective surfaces could cause some real performance problems, but others ran perfectly fine. This isn't the kind of game where you need a rock solid frame rate in the first place, so I could easily see myself playing like this. Back to more action though, the original Far Cry ran decently. If I disabled the nice looking water, it would run much better, like almost double the frame rate, but that felt like a crime given how pretty the effect is. And anywhere between 35 to 60 FPS in the opening area is fine by me, and it ran no worse in combat. Given the big Crytek splash screen at startup, I expected this to be much heavier, so there was a really pleasant surprise here. Doom 3 was a fun one. If I turned off all the visual effects and ran it at the lowest resolution possible, it was fairly playable at about 45 frames a second. This didn't really detract from the game much either, because as is typical for Doom 3, you can't really see shit anyway, but still. If I'd bought this game on launch and brought it back to my fuck-ass Vaio, pleasantly surprised once again. San Andreas ran, yeah, this one was all over the place. It has a 25 FPS cap in the first place, but frequently dipped under that, both in and out of cutscenes. From what I understand, this is pretty typical for this PC port. It's kinda shit. I mean, for fuck's sake, it launches by default with the vertical axis inverted on the mouse. Excellent game, miserable port. Speaking of miserable ports, Sonic Adventure DX! Okay, it's become trendy in Sonic circles to shit on this port. It's fucking fine. This game was buggy as balls on the Dreamcast too. I should know, I actually have one. This ran perfectly fine though. Decently solid at 60Hz throughout most of my testing, once again at 1024x768. At native resolution it gets a little bit worse, but for these purposes it was alright. Sonic Heroes, on the other hand, well, besides being a much more frustrating game to play on keyboard, it really did not want to maintain 60Hz, and because of its VSync setup, it would fall all the way down to 30 whenever it couldn't hit that target, making the game run at half speed. Great! There is a setting to cap the FPS to 30, and dropping the resolution to 800x600 did make it more consistent, but honestly, fuck this game, I don't care. Oblivion Non-Remastered is a very funny looking game by modern standards, but it's even funnier in this case because it'll only run if I disable all the lighting. Seriously, any attempt to run this game with shadows at all hits 2 frames per second and no higher. Fortunately, garbage tier PCs were pretty common at the time, so ports tended to let you heavily scale things back, so I was able to make this game run okay until you got into any kind of combat. At which point, the screen space damage effect brought the frame rate into the low teens. Not ideal. This machine has a fairly hard cutoff around 2006 to 2007. Once the Xbox 360 and PS3 launched and you started seeing games targeted at that tier of hardware, the shine really wore off GPUs like this one, even though they were only 3 to 4 years old at the time. Imagine if Doom the Dark Ages launched in 2020. Yeah. I have a real love-hate relationship with this machine. It's the only Pentium 4 I own, and the fact it's got a good contemporary GPU makes it a much more fun machine. Saves me buying an overpriced P4 tower because they're retro now, huh? That said, the OS choice for this machine is super limited. The stock drivers only really work on XP, so in Vista there's no hardware control on the buttons. Windows 7 dropped support for this thing's GPU, and while it can be hacked to work, Windows 8 won't even boot, so it's truly the end of the line there. On the Linux side, 32-bit Linux distributions are getting harder and harder to come by, and the ones that do exist don't like this thing's SIS chipset. And also it's got an Nvidia GPU, modern proprietary drivers don't work, the old ones don't work on newer kernels, and Nouveau's a joke. It's not a great experience overall. But in a way, that's part of the charm. Windows XP is a really versatile operating system. You can run it on anything from a Pentium 2 to a 2nd gen Core i7, and it'll just work. But a Pentium 2 is much more suited to Windows 9X, and everything newer than a Core Duo can be much better served by 7, 8, and 10. So this machine that can only run Windows XP and at a push Vista, to me is much more interesting.